So in a physical network, before we start building systems, or an on-prem network, let me put it that way. In an on-premises network, before we start building systems, we build our network infrastructure. So we do cabling, we put in switches, we put in routers, if we need them, firewalls, if we need. So we'll build our network infrastructure before we start building our system infrastructure, because we need that network in place for the systems that we build to communicate with each other. Right? Servers have to be able to communicate with each other. Clients have to be able to reach their servers. Applications need to be able to communicate, and they need that network infrastructure. We've got the same thing in Azure. We need to create an Azure virtual network to support all of our virtual servers, our virtual resources, our applications, data source, whatever. We need a virtual network in Azure for all of these things to communicate. And then later on to maybe be able to connect from one virtual network to another, or from a virtual network to our on-prem network, so that all of our devices, no matter where they're hosted, our devices, our applications, our services can all communicate with each other. Okay. Now, with that in mind, let's start by creating an Azure virtual network. So I'm going to come to here and I'm going to choose virtual networks, and I'm going to create a new virtual network. Now I've got a couple of, three, not a couple of, three little resource groups. So I'm going to put this in my demonstrations resource group, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is going to be my demo virtual, see if I can spell it right, network. And I'm going to store this in US West 2 just for the fun of it. Okay, so next, once I give it the name, then I'm going to start setting my options. So I can use the virtual network encryption. I can enable that. I can enable Azure Bastion, I think is how you pronounce it, paid service that provides secure RDP SSH connectivity over TLS. When you connect over that, your virtual machines do not need a public IP address. Very cool. Like that. It's paid service, so I'm not going to activate that. Azure Firewall, if I want to use that. By the way, you can come back and enable some of these things a little later on too. And then Azure DDoS protection. Again, very, very useful. It is a paid service, so I'm not going to activate it at the moment. But these are a bunch of security options that you can enable for you. So I'm going to click Next. And then I'm going to set my address space. So I want to make sure that this address space does not overlap with anything else that I'm going to be doing, right? So I don't want this to overlap with my on-prem network. I don't want this to overlap with another virtual network. I'm not going to do, because that's going to create problems for me. So I'm going to delete this address space, and I'm going to add an IPv4 address space here. I want to actually change that, and I'm going to do, deleting it didn't accomplish anything, I was already at the right spot, 172.16.0.0, and I'm going to do this as a /16. This tells me I have 65,000 addresses. Okay, then I can add subnets if I want to this too. So I'm going to go ahead and add a subnet, and this will allow me to subnet my address space. So I can give it a subnet name, a subnet purpose, the address space that I want it to have available, the how many or what size I want it to be, and then whether I want this to be a private subnet or not. Private subnet means no outbound access. NAT gateway if I need it, NAT security group, router table if I have, or network security group. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Service endpoints if I need enabled here. That's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later on as well. So I'm going to set, this is going to be my default subnet. I'll just go ahead and name it default. And it's 172.16.0.0/24. I can adjust here how many addresses I want to have available in it. I'm going to go ahead and leave this, and then I'm going to leave the rest of this unallocated. All right, so my whole address space is going to be this whole 172.16.0.0 through 172.16.255.255, and this is going to be my first subnet for it. And I'm going to leave the rest of that address space unallocated for the moment. And then I can create tags. By the way, you can create multiple subnets here right from the outset if you want to. So, don't need any tags, so we're going to go to the review and create, and it's going to validate everything for me. We'll give this a second. And then once validation is completed, we'll go ahead and create our address space. Okay, there we go. So this is all of our settings, validation, completed everything. So we're going to create, and this says we are deploying a virtual network to demonstrations. So once this completes, then we'll be able to view our virtual network either through the virtual networks or by going to, hey, there we go. Here's our demo virtual network. Okay, you can go away now. Deployment succeeded. Here's our demo virtual network. We can view, this gives us our overview. We can look at our inputs, our our outputs, and our template. Okay, so there we go. We have created an Azure virtual network. Let me go ahead and click go to resource. Here we go. The resource group, the location, the subscription, and then a bunch of other things that we can come back. And like I said, we can do a bunch of post-deployment configuration. But at this point, our virtual network is up and running.